Sports Radio.
Here comes the siren. I want to go higher. Oh, my goodness. Posey will defend. Oh! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal. Oh, baby, for sure.
Cabin Sports Radio starts now.
By God, we didn't think it was possible, but he did it. Michael, Dana White made pro sports happen again. That's if you can call UFC and mixed martial arts pro sports, which is arguable, but let's not get into semantics just yet. We've got a whole show for that. Welcome to Cabin Sports Radio. Lecter and Unbreakable Mike Gibbons with you once again. How you doing, Mr. Unbreakable Mike Gibbons?
Oh, I'm very good, man. I'm feeling rejuvenated this morning. The first live sports in about almost exactly 2 months. Same goes for UFC. I think they had a 2-month hiatus. President Trump was sending his congratulations to Dana for getting sports off the ground. Hopefully, it's the start of many to come soon.
For the sake of context, we are recording this show at 2:02 p.m. Mike says he's feeling good this morning, so this is going to be a fun show.
Feeling very rejuvenated. It's a good feeling, man. That was, 3 hours of televised live sports. It was weird because it was in front of an empty arena, but everything else, all the other elements of live sports were there. So feeling good, and hopefully the other leagues can get off the ground pretty soon here.
Yeah, well, that'll be really interesting, obviously, to see how we've been talking about it for weeks now, how the NHL, how the NBA is planning on possibly continuing, what they are planning on doing. We will get into all of that and more, and of course, talk UFC 249 as Cabin Sports Radio, brought to you by Sport North. Takes over the Cabin Radio airwaves for another hour of sports chat, but let's not waste time, Mike. Let's get into the headlines with CSR News.
Well, we talked about UFC off the top. We'll get to that in a little bit. We're going to start with a little more unfortunate news that was sort of making the rounds on social media over the past week, and it happened in the world of hockey, where the Washington Capitals have placed Brendan Leipsic on unconditional waivers. The club announced the decision on Friday, 2 days after it was revealed that the forward had made misogynistic comments in a private group chat. The 25-year-old also mocked former and current teammates in the chat, which his younger brother was also a part of. The Capitals and the National Hockey League both released statements saying they were investigating the situation further and that they would address any inexcusable content going forward.
Yeah, if you pay attention to any sports media, and well, that pays attention to hockey, which is not all of them, but yeah, if you're a hockey fan at all, you've seen this story come up. It's been all over the place, even in, non-hockey circles. But basically, as Mike said, Brendan Leipsic, journeyman forward. And I mean, a pretty young journeyman forward. He's 25 years old, and he's played for, I think, 4, maybe Washington was his 5th club now. Played with the Leafs briefly, then was picked up by the Las Vegas Golden Knights in the expansion draft. Then had a brief cup of coffee in L.A., Vancouver for the better part of the last 2 seasons. And Washington, he just signed a 1-year league minimum contract. So not exactly the kind of player who is comfortable enough to get away with this sort of thing as far as their playing status goes. And obviously the Washington Capitals wasting no time in reacting to that, applying for an unconditional release to his contract. Obviously, they are making their stance very clear that it's basically, you know what? yeah, your obviously your comments were leaked. You didn't intend for other people to hear that, but you're clearly not a important enough player to the franchise, quite frankly, to let this become a distraction to this team. So we're just going to let you go sooner than later and, wish you well on your journey. It's a tough spot for Brendan Leipzig to be in. Obviously, as far as his career goes, the comments, there's not really much defending that. I mean, we've all said, and you've seen this obviously come up, this narrative from many different circles. We've all said things in private that we would not want people to see and just be splashed in front of the general public. Everyone knows it. Everyone has said things that they, if it got put in front of the world, essentially, for the world to judge those comments without any sort of context. Not that any sort of context really defends these comments, but we would not feel very good about that happening. So it's tough. He's in a tough spot now because, like you say, he was on a 1-year league minimum contract. His options were not exactly limitless, and now he becomes a player with a stigma attached to his name.
Yeah, I remember, I think I was first drawn to it. It was obviously trending on Twitter. I believe I had heard his name before, but like you said, certainly not a household name and a bit of a journeyman. He's been around. So that got me sort of into through the vortex, the Twitter vortex, if you will. Why is this guy trending? And then you find out very quickly he's an NHL player trending for all the wrong reasons, for extremely inflammatory, misogynistic, just downright degrading comments made towards women. It's funny that you mentioned all of the stops he's made, because I was just thinking in my head, I think of 5 of the teams he's already played on, of the chat elements that were exposed, he was blatantly making fun of teammates on at least 3 of those teams.
Right.
And obviously those comments surfaced too, making fun of the horrible crew that was in Vancouver, had some really unpleasant remarks about Tanner Pearson's wife. There's a picture of Tanner Pearson skating over to the front row where his wife and newborn child, so she had just given birth, were in the front seat, and he made a comment about Tanner's wife. And then his own teammates, his current teammates, Garnet Hathaway, and another Capitals player, had just wrapped up a podcast or something and posted a picture, and then he said something to the effect of how they were both losers. So as soon as this all circulated, and then obviously all the comments about women, which were just completely inappropriate, no time of day for that kind of stuff. As soon as that surfaced, I thought the writing was really on the wall, especially for someone like you said, who's not really a contributor in terms of helping that club win. And Washington's a good team. So not really surprised at all when news came that he was placed on waivers for the sake of terminating his contract. It felt like that was the only thing that could happen. If it didn't, holy cow, how do you go back into that locker room and face the guys, 2 of which you've made fun of, and they know that you've made fun of? And then you imagine, if the next time you're in Vancouver or the next time you're in Los Angeles, you're going to have a little bit of an X on your back. I imagine Tanner Pearson would probably want to smash him into the glass. So, it felt like the writing was on the wall. How many bridges can you possibly burn in one group chat? So, it'll be on a league minimum contract. It'll be interesting to see what options there are for him going forward. I can't see anyone right now wanting to pick that up immediately. You're going to have a player with an X on his back. And I think the same fate for 2 of the other guys in that chat, one of them being his younger brother. I think he plays on an affiliate team, I want to say in Manitoba somewhere. I believe a similar fate awaits him or has already been announced. I'm not entirely sure. And then there was another player with another NHL affiliate. So not a good look for anyone. And I think karma's going to hit them real soon.
Yeah, and I mean, like you say, how many bridges can you burn in one group chat? Maybe that was the theme of the chat. Maybe they were having some fun. And they're like, you know what? Let's start up a roast chat. It's we're all being really nice to each other these days, and I just not only miss being on the ice, but I miss the whole brotherhood of the chirping nature of hockey. And wouldn't it be nice to just get into a group setting where we can just hurl insults at each other and it all be good. It all be just left on the ice, as it were. Obviously, context is, the one thing that you could maybe point to and say, I mean, I still don't know why there would be a scenario where you would talk about teammates and the significant others of teammates and just their personal lives. I mean, again, these are all players who have spent time around many different hockey players and probably have liked a lot of them, probably have not liked a lot of them. It's bound to happen that you're going to have conversations, especially with family saying, and your family, especially if you're hanging out with high profile NHL players, like say, Brendan Leipsic had played alongside, Jaromir Jagr or something like that. Of course, all his friends and family would, when they talk to him, want to know what's Jaromir really like. So there's going to be a certain amount of that, and I'm sure. It's the answer was not always going to be, oh, he's great. He's a great teammate. You're not always going to get that clean, tidy, CBC Hockey Night in Canada post-game interview in real life. So again, it is a private conversation where comments may or may not have, as vile as they are, been taken completely out of context. But somehow this got leaked, and the thing is, it's not like Brendan Leipsic is the only person having private conversations where they're maybe not saying the most flattering things about teammates and other people in general. But it is a wonder, and, this is not adventuring into any sort of victim shaming or victim blaming, but it is a wonder why Brendan Leipsic, of all people, may have been targeted for this sort of thing, to have these really awful things that they've said get leaked online and really drag their name through the mud. It is what it is. He's got to own up to it and pretty much figure out a way, if there is a way to get past this. And obviously a lot of self-reflection is probably going on right now and is going to be necessary for his future if he is going to try to, or if he is going to find a way to mend these fences and these bridges that just got torched in these comments.
Yes.
But it's not going to be easy. And like we said, he's a league minimum 1 year journeyman forward. It's not like he's a big guy who's someone who is going to be, looking to bring in if they need a little bit of nastiness on their roster. He's, and I mean, he had a good junior career. He put up some serious points in the WHL, but he's not a guy who to this point has translated that to big time production in the NHL. So there's a lot of guys like that, and if you don't stand out with what you bring to the ice as a player in his with his stature, you really shoot yourself in the foot when you now have painted yourself as, for lack of a better word, a jerk. So it's a really tough situation for him. And I mean, like I was saying earlier, alluding to earlier, let's be honest. This is not the first time that NHL or NHL players or any other pro sports league has had players who have had private conversations and not saying particularly flattering things and then have that leak online. You may recall the Ottawa Senators had an incident, I think it was just last season, where they were sharing a cab, or it was an Uber, actually. They were sharing an Uber coming back from like a club or a restaurant or wherever they happened to be. And it was Matt Duchene. I remember him for sure. And there were there were like 3 other players in the Uber, and the Uber driver had this video recording going. And in there, you know, they've all obviously been out for a meal. They probably had a few drinks. They're feeling loose, and they were just completely trashing their coach, other players, and just like really just going off. And then that video made its way online. They looked like complete idiots. They had to do damage control of their own. But it's kind of been forgotten now for a guy, especially a guy like Matt Duchene, because he's an elite level player who, you know, if you're convinced that this guy has learned from this obvious mistake, he has matured from it and is going to move forward and become a more mature person because of it. Well, he's also a really good hockey player, so and an asset to any team. So teams are a little more willing to kind of look the other way on that. But if you're Brendan Leipsic, who has yet to prove that you can make a Matt Duchene sort of impact on a team, well, your options are a little more limited. You got to work that much harder now if you do plan to find another team. And I mean, he's got options, like maybe not in the NHL for a couple years, maybe let things cool off, but I'm sure he can find work in the KHL. I'm sure in any of the European elite leagues. You know, this is obviously not as big a news on the other side of the ocean as it is in the NHL. I'm sure people know about it, people certainly within the hockey community. But this is not an insurmountable thing to his career. If this is all contingent on whether or not he is taking this seriously and trying to reflect and become a better person because of it.
Yeah, certainly his future looking murky at best at this point. I would say a journeyman, like you said, already been around the 5 clubs at the age of 25. Not really what you want to see by that point in your career. You're not even in your prime as an NHL player yet. That Duchene conversation you mentioned kind of had me thinking of there's an NBA parallel I have here, and D'Angelo Russell was labeled as a snitch for the longest time. I want to say it was a Snapchat video when he was on the Lakers who drafted him. This would have been a couple of years ago now. And a Snapchat video surfaced of Nick Young, who was dating Iggy Azalea at the time.
Okay.
Talking about all of his delvings with other women. So that made the rounds on social media and promptly broke up. Nick Young and Iggy Azalea and his teammates, D'Angelo Russell's teammates, weren't very happy with him because those comments weren't meant to see the light of day. But yeah, it does sort of open up an interesting dialogue about, these conversations were clearly had in a private sphere. They were not meant to make the rounds publicly whatsoever, and now have, and it's extremely unfortunate for someone like Brendan Leipsic. But at the same time, a lot of those conversations were extremely inappropriate, derogatory, misogynistic, however you want to label it, not flattering at all towards women and his views towards them, and then just not being a nice person when it comes to how he handled former teammates and former opponents. So we'll see what the future holds for Brendan Leipsic. Not looking so great right now. He will have to, like you said, have a look in the mirror, see how he moves forward from this. I'm sure there has been something in the form of a public apology since, but first, not that he was shielding it or deflecting it all, but it seemed to be more so blaming it on, a hacker for getting into one of his friends' accounts and publicizing it. I'm sure there has been something in the way of a formal apology. You would have to after something like this, but he'll have to have a look in the mirror, what his priorities are and move forward.
I know he deleted his Instagram, so I mean that's pretty serious business.
That's probably a good step too. And then see what happens going forward. Let's shift gears. A little bit of a happier story, and someone that a lot of Canadian fans will recognize. Canadian mixed martial artist George St. Pierre is heading to the Ultimate Fighting Championships Hall of Fame. The retired fighter ruled the UFC's welterweight division for years before putting a bow on his stellar career by claiming the middleweight title in his final outing. St. Pierre's success inside the cage put MMA on the map in Canada and helped fuel the UFC's worldwide expansion. He retires with an official record of 26 wins and 2 losses.
Yeah, obviously, like, when you say he put MMA on the map in Canada, it is a little bit of hyperbole because, UFC was already somewhat established in Canada, but I am a perfect example of that being exactly true. I was not really a fan of MMA. The first mixed martial arts event I ever watched was, and I can't remember what the number was, but it was the UFC where there was the rematch between Ken Shamrock and Tito Ortiz. I knew I knew who Ken Shamrock was because I was a big pro wrestling fan growing up, and he and Ken Shamrock had made a pretty good go of things in pro wrestling. He was already a legend in mixed martial arts and the UFC in particular. One of the 2 inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame when that started back in 2003. He had a really legendary name for himself, but now, if you recall that second fight, he was very much at the end of his mixed martial arts career, which is funny that I say that because he fought like 6 months ago on some card, and you're just like,
wow,
oh, Ken, I know you would kill like me, but why are you still fighting? Regardless, a legend in mixed martial arts, one of the greatest of all time, a UFC legend and a UFC Hall of Famer. He got absolutely mashed by Tito Ortiz, who I knew also as a big name, but didn't really know anything about him. It was the first time I'd seen him. And I think on that card was also George St. Pierre versus Matt Hughes. I think he might have won his first welterweight title on that card. I might be mistaken, but either way, that was what made me a UFC fan. Was first seeing George St. Pierre fight and just following his career from then on. He, obviously there was the Canadian thing. He was one of very few Canadian fighters at the time. And there's just an aura about the guy. For one, he was fun to watch in the octagon. The way he moved, the things he could do, the strength, for a guy who was fighting in the welterweight division, which is 170 pounds. It's not comparatively big guys, but he just had all the tools, but had the when the fight was done, when the final bell rang. And he put the microphone in front of him, and it was just this humble, thick French accent, French Canadian, just a charming individual. You're just the kind of guy that you wanted to cheer for. It was almost the way like pro wrestling writes the villain character and the babyface, the hero character for you. George St. Pierre didn't need any of the antics. He didn't need anyone to write anything for him. He just had that natural charisma. He was a hero, and you wanted to cheer for him.
Really Dana White's poster boy for a long, long time, and the face of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, a pay-per-view gold mine. If he was on a card, and it would always be the headline event because it was always a title defense.
Yeah.
And he'd always win. So he always sold. Talking with my friends, and it may just be a generational thing. UFC 100 is always one that we sort of circle back to as July 2009, when the sport for us, anyways, was sort of put on the map. Looking back at the card, Brock Lesnar versus Frank Mir, George St. Pierre versus Thiago Alves, both would have been title defenses, and then you've even got another good middleweight bout, Dan Henderson and Michael Bisping.
Yeah.
So really, really good fights. I think that was the one where Henderson won via KO. There was a lot of trash talk heading into that event, and I think Henderson won by KO. And
finished
got
it off with the falling fist drop. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he got one more shot in after he was out because I remember him saying something like he was talking a lot heading up to this fight. I really just wanted to shut him up.
Yeah. Man.
But that was a fight for me that really put GSP and MMA on the map. for me. But, I think there was a lot of respect for GSP last night with the first event back, 249 in Jacksonville, Florida. They made the announcement yesterday. They had a nice little montage they put together for him with a lot of current and former fighters paying tributes, and of course Dana White paying tribute to GSP and his just stellar career. But one of the first to really combine the striking, especially earlier in his career, but just a professional wrestler, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and how he approached fights, I think, was so unique, incredibly focused. It would have been really interesting to have an inside look into his training camps. One of those guys that mixes, meditation with more traditional fighting roots, but then very adaptive and was able to blend all these different styles together and turn him into the fighter he was. I just remember at any point, if any fight involving him goes to the ground, it's over.
Yeah.
And there were some criticisms, I think, later in the career that, his fights, he would never finish fights.
Right.
A lot of them go on the distance. But that just speaks to his stamina. He was always involved in title fights. He was always defending them. And you knew that if it went the distance, he was going to win, because if it got to the ground, he would dominate.
Yeah.
So I think when after that very narrow win over Johnny Hendricks, the kind of controversial one, I think it was back in 2013.
Right.
He came out of he needed some time away from the sport. And it would have been a lot of pressure being really the face of the sport. And I'm sure that's why someone like Dana White would have loved him. One, just injecting that huge interest from a Canadian standpoint. And then beyond, everyone probably remembers the one fight when they came back to Toronto and he defended his title on Canadian soil. That was massive for the sport, which Dana White himself long called the Mecca of MMA Canada because of just the huge level of interest here. But he was the kind of guy, GSP, who would win in the octagon, and then post-game, he's in a suit. So he gave a post-game interview. So he could always be that sort of respectable face for the UFC. No scandals, no controversies, just an ultimate professional. But when he came out of retirement, or that brief stint of retirement in 2017, I think that's when he really not that he needed to, but he really cemented his legacy by smashing Michael Bisping, winning the middleweights, and then officially retiring afterwards. So one of the best to ever do it. He has the respect of everyone in the sport, and those two blemishes on his record, 26-2, avenge both of those. Beat Matt Hughes twice and Matt Serra. So even the guys that did get to him, he was able to avenge. So will go down as one of the best ever for sure, and obviously a very worthy induction into the UFC Hall of Fame. Yeah,
and I mean, I always thought his career was kind of a microcosm of mixed martial arts and the UFC in general, whereas, when the UFC started, the whole idea was, let's bring these different style of fighters in, have them face one another, and see what style wins. It wasn't necessarily like this guy knows how to do, he's trained in all areas versus this guy who's trained in several other areas. And let's see how these two fighters who have been bred in these different ways compete. It was, let's put a boxer against a kickboxer. Let's put, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu expert against a wrestler and see who wins in that fight. Yeah. It was more styles versus names. But and George St. Pierre came in very much in that way, as it was he had a very kind of one-dimensional style. He was basically a taekwondo. He would heavily relied on kicks, karate, that sort of thing. But then when he was forced to adapt and evolve, he injected wrestling and the strongest ground game, I think, probably still that the UFC has ever seen. Arguably the greatest wrestler in UFC history is George St. Pierre. And once he brought that in and became a more well-rounded fighter, added that third dimension to his arsenal, like you said, he was basically unbeatable. And whether or not people, like you said, you alluded to the criticism throughout his career, a lot of people thought his fights were boring to watch. And it was because he was so dominant on the ground, and he knew that that was what he had to do to win fights, or at least to give him the best chance of winning a fight. If George St. Pierre decided he wanted to just stand and he wanted to, shut the critics up and say, you know what, I'm not even going to use my wrestling, and I still think I have a pretty good chance of winning this fight, odds are he did still have a pretty good chance of winning that fight. But the UFC is not, you don't make money. I mean, you do make money by making fights exciting, but you also don't win fights by getting punched in the face more than you have to. Right. And I think George St. Pierre was reasonable enough and had his head square enough on his shoulders to get that and think, yeah, you know what? Why wouldn't I adapt the strategy that has won probably the best success rate in mixed martial arts fighting history? Wrestlers, I think if you look back in UFC history, probably have overwhelmingly, I would say, the best success rate in fighting history in mixed martial arts. So he incorporated that, and plus you always knew that his conditioning, like you say, if it went the distance, right, which most of his fights did, he got criticized for not knocking out in spectacular style, the Chuck Liddell style where you're going to see someone get knocked out. People love that, but people also, like George St. Pierre, don't like getting knocked out. So why take the chance? Right. And you knew that his conditioning was going to take him the distance. And basically, it came a question eventually of, is his opponent's conditioning up to his level? If it's not, you're not going to beat the guy because he's faster than you, he's stronger than you, and his ground game is dominant. So It became very apparent early on, and I mean, eventually, retires with an overall record of 26-2. It became apparent long before that George St. Pierre is maybe as close to being unbeatable in the current era of mixed martial arts as it comes. And with that in mind, like you say, that other element of GSP that just made you love him, you knew he was someone that would not embarrass you for being a fan. Right. An absolute class act through and through. And you could always rest your hat on George St. Pierre. You always knew you'd be proud to be a supporter of George St. Pierre. And I mean, we could point to many other fighters who, as good of fighters as they are, as good a, everyone likes a winner, but they could do things outside of the octagon that are pretty cringeworthy. You knew GSP wasn't going to embarrass you for being a fan like that. And for all those reasons and more are why the entire fight community is so happy to see him get this nod and go into the UFC Hall of Fame, where he so definitely deserves to be.
I know you were not talking about John Jones right there.
Or not at all. No.
Or Nate Diaz.
No, none of those guys. No.
I think the only headache GSP would have given Dana White throughout his career, and certainly during the apex of his career, was who the heck do we put against this guy? Because they would have all the contenders. You could have whatever rankings you wanted for the welterweight division, but he was always the champ. Yeah. And every single time, it probably would have been a struggle sometimes to come up, all right, who's actually worthy? Who is someone we can actually put in the octagon and give a fighting chance against George St. Pierre? The only what if and sort of thing that fans will never get an answer to, we never got that super fight between him and Anderson Silva, which is unfortunate because they were both long the champs of their divisions. Anderson Silva was downright terrifying. I remember that fight against Forrest Griffin, and he very dominant like George St. Pierre, obviously, but he was one of those guys that did go out to humiliate his opponent. Yeah. Respectful afterwards, as most are. But my goodness, he was scary in the middleweight division, and for the longest time, the fans wanted it, and I know Dana probably to some level really wanted to make it happen. Yeah. Who knows how much the fighters themselves wanted to make it happen, but we were robbed of that, unfortunately. Silva gone on to lose to Chris Weidman twice, and then had that horrific leg injury, and hasn't really made his way back since. And now with George St. Pierre retired, we won't get it. But all in all, a fantastic career, and like you said, very worthy of his induction into the UFC's Hall of Fame. Let's stick with the UFC, and as we mentioned off the top of the show, the Ultimate Fighting Championship held its first live and televised event in over 2 months in Jacksonville, Florida last night. UFC 249 was originally scheduled for April 18th in New York, but was postponed until last night due to COVID-19. The stacked card, which took place in an empty arena, featured wins from lightweight Justin Gaethje, bantamweight Henry Cejudo, and heavyweight Francis Ngannou.
Yeah, whether you like it or not, right or wrong, you kind of got to tip your cap to Dana White on this one. Again, whether you agree if they should have been able to do it or not, he found a way. And man, like that is sheer will, tenacity. They did everything that they needed to do to make an event happen, got all the paperwork in place, got all their safety procedures, all their ducks in a row, yada, yada, yada. They got it done. And UFC 249 is showing that, well, I mean, it's something that we already knew, which is that people had, now like a very starved appetite for pro sports and live sporting events. And they got it done. I mean, broken down in comparison. I mean, Dana White's made some comments in post-event interviews where he said, maybe this is a blueprint, for other organizations to figure out how to get it done. Comparatively, the UFC was probably, aside from being an indoor event, that was probably the biggest hurdle. I mean, obviously, as far as like testing and that goes, they got all that squared away and covered. There are obviously a lot of hoops to jump through, but compared to the NBA or the NHL, which are the ones that are currently most frantically trying to figure out a way to continue operations, comparatively very easy. Essentially, 1 versus 1. Obviously, there's no physical distancing. There's no physical distancing in any pro sports, so that's a hurdle for all of them to have to figure out. But 1 versus 1. Obviously, you got their fight crews. You got the UFC, staff and personnel there as well. But when you're in a big space like an arena, you can very easily, for all of those people, stay physically distanced. So that's all manageable. We talked about the empty arena. They did that, and I think I don't think anyone was too put out by that. So that hurdle was jumped. But comparatively, I don't know if there's too much that other leagues can take away from this. I think they've already got a firm understanding of what they have to do to make the return to their seasons, the NBA and the NHL, I'm referencing, possible. It's just there are more hurdles to jump. There's obviously more cities involved. Potentially, there's more people involved. But regardless of all that, for what it is, I think you kind of got to tip your cap to Dana White for putting in what had to have been a ton of hard work into making this event happen.
Hey, this is the same guy that was going to buy a private island somewhere in
That's right.
South America.
Yeah, why would we be surprised?
Yeah. No, you're right, though. Kudos, and even President Donald Trump extending his thank yous to Dana White for getting sports back into the public eye. I think they had to submit a pretty lengthy proposal to make sure that they're adhering to all physical distancing and public health orders. But like you said, the judges, photographers, the camps, all distanced far enough apart, everyone wearing masks. Imagine, there's going to be some issues with the spread of bodily fluids. It's probably not a good idea for you to have someone else's blood on you, but that was the case. There was some absolute bloodbaths last night. I think the last 3 fights anyways, or 2, the one between Dominic Cruz and Henry Cejudo, there was one point I think they headbutt. It was an unintentional headbutt, and both of them were just gushing. And then there was obviously in the title fight, Tony Ferguson, he got beat up quite a bit by Justin Gaethje. So two really good fights. The heavyweight fight before, lasting all of 20 seconds. That's what Francis Ngannou does to people. He's a big guy, and typically those heavyweight fights they don't go on for too long. Anyways, it's usually the smaller guys with more endurance that'll get you the really good fights for 5 rounds. Not so much in the higher weight classes, but no, all together a really good event. Bruce Buffer, Herb Dean, Joe Rogan, they were all in their elements. Even Dana White coming out with the belts for the last 2 fights. From a viewer standpoint, not a crazy difference. I mean, the fighter introductions were a little weird, but they stuck to the script otherwise. They still had their introduction songs. They came out in the same method with their team. The camera's on them. Bruce Buffer did his usual introductions. And Joe Rogan was Joe Rogan, right? Some inside the ring interviews afterwards, just as he normally would. A nice moment with Cejudo afterwards, announcing his retirement after reclaiming his title. So all in all, the viewership experience, not really that altered. It was a little weird. I think, and I'd be curious to hear from a fighter's perspective how different it was for them, because you're suddenly hearing everything. You're hearing what the other camp is telling the other fighter to do. You're probably hearing individual, shutters from cameras and photographers that are right there. Who knows? You're hearing suddenly all these things you wouldn't have been hearing before. So it'd be interesting to hear from their standpoint how different it was. But really, major props to the UFC for giving a pretty sports-starved country in both the United States and Canada, and whoever else is accessing pay-per-views, a really good show. And it was nice after 2 months off to finally get some live sports again.
Yeah, and on top of all that, we had a pretty big announcement as well following Henry Cejudo's bantamweight defense. He announced a little retirement, as we will hear right here.
I'm ruthless, Joe. I'm ruthless, man. I may be cringy, corny, but boy, can I fight.
You're one of the greatest combat sports athletes of all time.
I am the greatest combat sports athlete of all time. Nobody has my resume. I just defended my flyweight title. I just defended my bantamweight title. And I'm an Olympic champ. Did I forget to mention that?
Pretty impressive, sir. Congratulations on an awesome performance.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And I actually kind of want to make an announcement, man. Uncle Dana, UFC, everybody, thank you so much. Hunter Campbell, all the UFC staff. Joe, I'm happy with my career. I've done enough in the sport. I want to walk away. I want to enjoy myself. I'm 33 years old. I have a girl now, Amanda, who's watching back home. I eventually want to start a family. Since I was 11 years old, I sacrificed my whole life to get where I'm at today. I'm not going to let nobody take that from me. So I'm retiring tonight, Joe. I'm 33 years old. I'm happy with my career. Again, Uncle Dane, I want to say thank you for everything. You're the man. Everybody here, Heidi, everybody, thank you so much, man. I'm Triple C's out. You guys don't have to hear my ass no more.
Well, thank you, sir. It's been an honor to call your fights.
Thank you.
Henry Cejudo, ladies and gentlemen.
Now, speaking of it sounding a little different, obviously.
Get that applause at the end.
Yeah, I love the light smattering of applause. Yeah, normally, of course, if a guy is announcing his retirement after another successful title defense and a really impressive career, you would hear a pretty big pop from the crowd saluting him and saluting that moment. So obviously that stood out as a little bit strange. Also, one thing that I didn't really think about until this, and I remember seeing an article or a comment about something that the NHL would have to consider in a return to the regular season scenario in playing in front of empty crowds is the chirping. What are you going to do? Oh, yeah. Like, that's always been one of the funny, lighthearted moments of hockey when we're watching that, and you hear a big expletive get let go above the crowd noise, because it usually doesn't happen. It's usually drowned out by the crowd noise. But if you don't have that, you're still obviously going to have ice surface microphones, so they will be picking all of that up, and not just the yelled ones, but like the chirping after the play, the pushing and shoving. It's going to pick up all of that. So I was kind of wondering, what is the NHL? Yeah, what are they going to do in that scenario? Are they going to like put it on a 15-second delay? I don't know, precede the games with a language warning. Obviously, the UFC doesn't have to worry about that sort of thing quite as much, because I think they kind of skew to an older demographic anyway. So I don't know that that's...
And if you're making a pay-per-view purchase, you know exactly what you're signing up for. It's not like you can accidentally come across a channel. But you're right. You're absolutely right. They're going to have serious conversations about the types of microphones that they're using to pick up that ice level or court level gameplay, because that is a whole other element we're going to get exposed to now. It kind of makes you think about the mental pressures and that you'd be exposed. Like, imagine being in a ring, hearing the other corner's team telling their guy what to do. It'd be hard not to take that in as you're fighting and you're being told by your own corner what you should be doing. It that takes a little bit of mental strength there, right? They might be saying pretty hurtful things.
Yeah. Oh, this strange new world we're living in. The issues are coming up that we never even considered before, and that being our big potty mouths.
Cabin Sports Radio.
Cabin Sports Radio brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. Check them out at sportnorth.com. All right, we continue the CSR headlines with an update on something we talked about a bit last week, and that was the fact that Adam Silver and the NBA has been comparatively quite quiet to the NHL, which of course is the closest comparison as far as leagues that are looking to return to work, because they both kind of got hung out to dry just as they were approaching that final stretch towards the playoffs. But Adam Silver made an announcement about what the NBA's thought process is at, and a decision to resume this year's season.
So a decision to resume this year's NBA season could extend into June, Silver says. The commissioner held a league-wide conference call on Friday, in which he also indicated that any games would be played in empty arenas. On the same day, a number of league facilities reopened so that players can resume some light workouts. The NBA suspended play back on March 11th after Utah center Rudy Gobert tested positive for COVID-19.
There was also a quote I read in his conference call where a reporter asked about basically the financial implications of just what's occurred, the stoppage thus far, and what the uncertain future that the NBA faces for the rest of this season. They basically said, what financial implications are these going to have? Are you going to lose a bunch of money? And he was vague, but also very clear, and saying something to the effect of, the NBA is not blind to the financial hardships that all of this will result in. Basically, we know, we're not going to get into discussing that yet, because again, it is still an uncertainty. Obviously this is not ideal for everyone. So, but still, even whether or not the NBA can resume the season, if they can get it figured out with the Players Association and the Chief Public Health Office, there's still not 100% certainty as to where they're going. They're still throwing around ideas and hoping for the best, but nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. But at the same time, when asked about the finances, he was basically like, "Yeah, this is going to suck. We know." Yep.
Well, we in our last CSR headline, we'll get to the league that's probably hurting the most right now, and that's the Canadian Football League. But Adam Silver, who has always been pretty forthright, pretty honest, this is a league that was struggling a little bit even before this happened, and we've talked about this before with sort of their fallout with the Chinese market based on the comments that Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey had made about the movement, the freedom movement in Taiwan right now. That rubbed a lot of the Chinese market the wrong way. But Adam Silver came out. Really, for me, I think there's kind of 5 bullet points that came out of this conference call on Friday. Number one that we talked to right off the top of this segment, that a season decision, it probably won't happen in May. This is likely going to extend into June when we find out how this moves forward. Number two, if a season does resume, there will not be any fans expected. And I believe that will carry on into the next season as well, because he's also been pretty open about the fact that really until we have a vaccine for the coronavirus, there is a risk. We're still living with the virus for the foreseeable future. So that means that we cannot pack stadiums full of people until that vaccine is in full circulation. So that could mean that going into even the next NBA season, whenever it gets off the ground, we don't even know when this one is, it is very likely that there will not be fans for that either. Number three, I would say, so 40% is the number that he provided. 40% of all league revenues come from fans. So that's going to be ticket sales, merchandise sales, food, drinks in stadiums, anything else, anything whatsoever purchased by fans in stadiums makes up 40% of all league revenues that are gone. Mm-hmm. And they've, Silver's been pretty honest about how they're going to have to get creative in how they make up that really large gap. That's almost half of all their revenues. So there will have to be a lot of creativity on their parts to sort of fill that gap. Number four, there is still some hope that the playoffs are still in the picture. I think most people would still like for there to be an extended training camp so that players can get back into game shape. Some players haven't even been in a gym since it's open, and only now are some facilities reopening. So to play out, hopefully, the balance of the regular season. But he's still hopeful that we could have 7-game series in every round. And I think really the final, the points sort of coming out of that phone call on Friday, much like we've had discussions about the National Hockey League and how they would like to have centralized locations where the games would be played out. I think they're looking at the same for the NBA. And the two sites that I have heard the most, we talked about Disney World last time around. So Orlando, still very much in the conversation, and same with Vegas. Yeah. So I don't know if that means all teams would play at those two sites, but that I think is a discussion being had right now. And then obviously as the Toronto Raptors are concerned, there's the whole border issue. So I think it's pretty unlikely that we'll see games played in Toronto, probably for the remainder of this season, if it were my guess. So that's really sort of my main takeaways from at least the reports that are coming out from the league-wide conference call that was held on Friday. So hopefully we get some more news on that front pretty soon.
Yeah, and I think we can safely assume that between the two leagues, if there is a return to season and the centralized hubs, which I think is the only realistic way to approach it, as much as a lot of players, I don't think want to do that. I think business-wise, it's one of the few realistic scenarios. And between the two leagues, between the NHL and the NBA, if Toronto is going to be one of those central hubs for one of those two leagues, it's going to be for the NHL. And I don't think that you can justify having both of them there. Like you say, the travel issue, it doesn't make sense to play any games in Toronto with the Raptors being the sole Canadian franchise there. So that doesn't make any sense whatsoever if you're going the centralized hub route. And Toronto is a very, very likely option for the NHL to be one of the centralized hubs if/when there is a return. So, I think we can pretty safely assume that if there is pro sports being played in Toronto within the next couple months, it is going to be hockey and not basketball. But that seems like pretty much the only option. So we'll see where it goes from there. But it is kind of nice to hear a little bit of movement, a little bit of chatter from the NBA that things are being worked on. I think we could have safely assumed that things were being worked on and discussed anyway. But it is nice, for the fans to hear that something's underway. And if something can get figured out, then it will get figured out. So it's only a matter of time and seeing where things go from here.
Definitely. And then quickly, Lecter, before going to our last point about the CFL, it also sounds like Major League Baseball will be presenting owners and its Players Association with a return-to-play proposal as early as next week.
Okay.
And it sounds like if MLB were to, I shouldn't say return, really start, because we haven't had a start to the regular season yet. They're sort of circling early July with the goal. Now, we know that MLB seasons are marathons, usually 162 games. They're looking at slashing that in half. So anywhere from 78 to 82 games starting in July. So it sounds like there's a conference call on Monday. And if the ownership group is okay with that, they would then present it to the players union to get their input. And much like we're hearing across other leagues right now, centralized gameplay. So they're going to probably pick a couple of hub cities, have them play there. There's obviously the mandatory quarantine period if there's travel between the United States and Canada right now. And I think travel is restricted completely until later this month. So they'll have to look at centralized play like the other leagues are considering right now. And then potentially another thing I saw was extended postseason play. So instead of having 5 teams per conference, maybe opening it up to as many as 7 teams. So some movement there too. So maybe, across those three major sports, NBA, NHL, MLB, hopefully some movement in the next few weeks here as we start to open things up. I just had to laugh at the notion of someone actually having a conversation with the quote being, "Yeah, we're going to have to cut it to a half season, only 81 games." And, back to back. Yeah. There's baseball on every.
Oh, baseball.
It is a grind. Finally, Lecter, we'll turn to the sport that I think you and I can both agree on is probably hurting the most. Canadian Football League Commissioner Randy Ambrosie says the league's future is very much in jeopardy due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was revealed last week that the league is seeking up to $150 million in financial assistance from the federal government, and Ambrosie himself admits a full cancellation is likely. The league has already canceled training camps and pushed back the start of the 2020 regular season, and Ambrosie says further cancellations are looming.
Yeah, and I think right off the top, or in the first segment of the show, we talked about a little bit of hyperbole in the wording, but Randy Ambrosie did say, basically, you can quote him on that the league's future is very much in jeopardy, leaving no uncertain terms, painting a very grim picture, but doing it for obviously the reasons that he is looking out for the league's best interest and the league to continue as normal without losing money and without taking a pretty serious blow is going to need governmental financial assistance. Now, whether or not that final financial assistance comes in the form of grants or loans that the league then maybe pays back incrementally in future seasons, that remains to be seen. But the CFL needs help to not take a very serious hit this year, as the other leagues will as well. But the CFL, we all know, is very low budget in comparison. The fact that the commissioner is asking for $150 million to help the entire league, that speaks to, which might sound ridiculous to some people, but for a pro sports league, that is a very low sum of money.
The drop of the bucket.
Yeah, obviously, it is going to make a huge difference to the CFL and their future and their outlook if they do work out some kind of assistance deal with the Canadian government. But that remains to be seen whether that will happen or not. But I mean, it's interesting because, there's obviously two schools of thought. Some people who think, well, if the league isn't financially stable enough to figure this out on its own, then, maybe it's a natural selection sort of thing. And maybe the league doesn't deserve to exist. But then there's obviously the other school of thought being that, the CFL has been around for over 100 years. It is a cultural institution in the country of Canada as far as professional sports goes. And then there's the side of it that I didn't even really think of before. I read an article in the Hamilton Spectator talking about it today, where basically they made the argument that the CFL could very legitimately apply for this money under the and put sections of the application to direct the government towards the fact that if the CFL season is canceled entirely, this also wipes out a lot of part-time and seasonal and, potentially even full-time employment for a lot of Canadian citizens. So that puts a lot of people, potentially out of work that they were, maybe relying on with the CFL regular season happening. Obviously, the players are, that'll be sorted out with their contracts. Hopefully, if this assistance comes through, they'll be able to retain all contracts. I don't exactly know the legal ins and outs of what could happen there, but there are, I think, very legitimate implications that you've got to think of. That when you think of a professional sports league applying for emergency funding from the government, you just think, that doesn't seem important. Like people are losing their jobs. Like, why are we caring about a pro sports organization? But like I just said, that people's jobs are tied in with the CFL and its potential revenue loss. And like you said in the NBA story, 40% of revenue comes from the fans. I don't know the exact percentage of the revenue that comes from the fans for as far as the CFL goes, but I guarantee it is higher than that. They very, very heavily rely on attendance and the gate numbers because they don't have those television contracts that the NBA and the NHL and Major League Baseball and the NFL have.
Right.
They've had a very good relationship with TSN over the years, and they do all right. But I mean, it's not the same type of numbers. It's not even near the same league type of numbers for their TV contract revenue. So the CFL is a very unique beast in that way. It's gone through dark times before, very dark times, not these type of unprecedented times, but it's, the CFL has been on the verge of collapse before and figured out a way to recover. The good thing is I do think that they are well set up with a commissioner like Randy Ambrosie to approach this head on. He is a business-oriented, ambitious person. He's certainly, and he's already proven that he's not just going to stand idly by and wait and see what happens and potentially put the future of the league in jeopardy as it already stands. It kind of is. He's getting out ahead of it. He's doing what he needs to do to protect his league and try to ensure the future of it. And, I got to say, whatever happens, I got to say hats off to Randy Ambrosie for putting himself out there, putting the league out there, and making sure that he's doing everything he can to ensure the health of the CFL and its future.
He's certainly being honest, transparent, and really, in some cases, pretty somber. He's providing a pretty bleak outlook for the league, and really is appealing for help. You mentioned the revenues. So even he said himself, I think it was a House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. So he was presenting in front of federal politicians late last week, and at points was really raked through the coals, with some questioning, is this in the form of a loan? Is it in the form of a bailout?
Yeah.
Will this be paid back? He said he's, rather diplomatically, he's looking for a partnership, I think was how he phrased it. But
right.
He admitted, unlike the larger American-based leagues, they most of their revenue does not come from television rights, and that's why the NBA's salary cap keeps skyrocketing because of these huge television deals they're able to secure. The CFL, different story. The NBA, admitted 40% of their revenues come from ticket sales. Ambrosie said the CFL, that is the vast majority of their revenue comes from ticket sales. So they're adhering to public health orders right now by not having games, and it's hurting them because that's where a lot of their revenues come from. So it'll be interesting to see. Clearly, he does have the league's best interests in mind, but he has been very honest that they are struggling right now. So let's hope that they're able to come to some sort of agreements, and that that will ultimately benefit the players too. That was one of the criticisms of his presentation to the standing committee, that there was no representatives from any of their corporate sponsors or even the Players Association, and people were sort of calling into question the profit margins for some of the teams even before the pandemic. I think collectively teams lost somewhere around a combined $20 million last year. So it's a league that's been in trouble even before this pandemic happened. So hopefully they're able to get some assistance, not call this whole season a wash, and we're able to get the CFL back on.
Yeah, and I mean, those are pretty sobering numbers themselves. But the truth of the matter is, and legendary broadcaster for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Bob Irving, made some pretty on point comments on Twitter following this story breaking, saying essentially, and this is something that we, all Canadian football fans have known for years. It's just been the reality of the league for so many years that you kind of take it for granted. But the people who own these teams, who put the money into backing these franchises, they're not making money. They're at best, they're hoping at a good season that you make like a very modest, a very modest profit. But it's not like you're Jerry Jones, owning the Dallas Cowboys and you're just making money hand over fist. Like, all of those owners also came into money, in other industries and other avenues, and then bought their way into a pro sports franchise. But an NFL team is a sound investment. You are going to make money regardless of what NFL team you own. Like, no one's taking that on just to, be a charitable donor and see that American football continues to prosper because it's a cornerstone of our sporting culture or anything like that. That's not the NFL's game. There's tons of money there. That very much is the CFL's game. And Bob Irving called them Canadian, what did he call them? It's like millionaires, basically sport philanthropists was the way he described the ownership group of the CFL franchises. Some of them have been owners of clubs and franchises for many, many years, like 20, 25, 30 years. But they haven't done it because they thought it was a good investment. They haven't done it because they thought, you know what, with the money I'm making owning the BC Lions, I could retire on that kind of revenue. I wouldn't, Nobody is doing that. They own these clubs and they put money into these clubs from their other industries because they love the league. They love the history of the league and they want to see it prosper. Otherwise, if that wasn't the case, they wouldn't bother, because you know what? There is no other reason to own a CFL franchise other than wanting to see the league prosper and continue. So it is a very different league in that way. And hopefully that was made apparent enough. If it needed to be made apparent, hopefully it was made apparent enough by Randy Ambrosie as well in his appeal to the Canadian government, because this league has only existed for as long as it has because people love it and people want it to continue. That's it, So I have no doubt that they will figure something out. Like I say, the CFL has seen some dark times before, and it has always found a way to recover. So I hold on to the belief and hope that will happen again. But if not, well, then COVID, you jerk. You strike again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to your previous point about, just the amount of people that this affects, and we've seen how some of the other leagues are stepping up to help pay for their part-time arena staff who will be out of work now. But, all those folks are out of work right now. There's a lot of part-time shift type work, probably lower income work that isn't available now to those people. And like other leagues, the CFL gives back. They'll have community partners, regional partners who won't be getting as much support now with the league basically shut down for the time being anyway. So it affects a lot more than the players themselves. It's community partners and it's arena staff and many more that I'm probably not thinking of, but other people will be affected by this too. So hopefully some form of resolution is able to be passed.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that happy note, we are quickly running out of time, so we are going to take a break and come back for one more quick one to end off the show on Cabin Sports Radio.
Cabin Sports Radio. Download the CSR podcast at cabinradio.ca.
Cabin Sports Radio brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. For more on them, check out sportnorth.com. Finishing off this week's show, of course, we talked about Brendan Leipsic and what he may need to do if he wants to be welcomed back into another NHL locker room. One of the things is, stop throwing your teammates under the bus. And one of the other things would be maybe adding a little scrappiness to their game. There was one character in NHL history, recent history, who we all like to remark fondly upon. Some not so fondly, but he was, one, never shy about his opinions, even about teammates and former teammates. And two, even though he wasn't a big guy, didn't score a ton of points, he still always found a way to make an impact. We leave you with a few select chirps from Sean Avery. Have a great week and have a great long weekend. May long coming up, and we will talk to you the week after that on Cabin Sports Radio.
I'm not doing anything, Stewie. I know you're looking for me.
Okay, here.
Me?
Go.
Oh, you got my number already.
Go.
The puck was loose.
No, it's not. Go.
It is so. It's right there.
Gently flips it up and down the ice. No icing call. Yager in to chase. Final seconds of the period. Yager gets knocked down. The puck flipped out and the buzzer sounds. So a 12-5 shot advantage as the two teams come together. And, of course,
Chris
number
Neal.
16 in the middle of it with number 25 of Ottawa.
Well, Avery with the hit after Yager had gone in on the forecheck. And Avery jumped in with a big hit on Chris Neal. And, you don't think this crowd is happy to have him back in the lineup? And they're chanting his name as the buzzer is gone.
You can't handle me, George. Tell me when, big shooter. Tell me when.